Good morning, Oakmont. This is Sue Dibble from the Oakmont Sunday Symposium. I have the best time introducing you today to a friend of mine, Dr. Margaret Wallhagen, Meg. She's a professor of the Department of Physiological Nursing at UCSF. She's also been the chairperson of the Board of Trustees for the Hearing Loss Association of America. Your tax dollars are supporting her research currently and previously. It's very exciting. She's done well over 100 articles, scientific articles about hearing loss, about she works in Uganda. I mean, you could go on forever, but I'm going to stop now because I think what she's going to be talking about today, mumbling, hearing problems when you mumble, or your friend doesn't understand she has a hearing loss, you know, those kinds of things. We're going to be talking about that. Anyway, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Meg Wallhagen.
Hi, well, thank you for your introduction and for being able to talk with you today. I know we'll get a chance to sort of share more on Sunday when we'll be more, I say in person. So I'm excited about being here and talking to you about an area that is sort of a passion of mine over a large number of years now, and that's hearing loss. And it's something that many people don't take very seriously. So I'm hoping to share with you today. I'll share my screen so that I can have the slides up here. And then we'll be able to sort of just talk about, well, I've introduced this in terms of saying, why are you mumbling? And then strategies to hear better for better health. And what I want to do today in the short time that we have for you to look at today versus Sunday is to briefly review the importance of hearing to safety and to health. It's often not thought about in terms of it's important to health. Review why others don't always appreciate what it's like and why this complicates effective communication. Discuss the impact of hearing loss in individuals, their families, community, and in the healthcare system, because this again is extremely important in terms of misunderstandings and safe care. And then discuss strategies to promote effective communication in various settings across the spectrum of home, community, and healthcare. Oops, I got to use this little thing down here. The first thing to do is to really think about, why is hearing important? I mean, what is it about hearing that's so critical? Well, we usually think about in terms of engagement with others, and that's certainly important because we know today when we can't get with others, it can be very isolating. But it also is important in terms of warning signals, hearing cars coming from behind us, hearing alarms, smoke alarms, hearing sirens, all those kinds of things that are so important for our safety. It's important in terms of connection to our environment. We often don't think about that, but even though sometimes we wish we could turn off the noise or background noise, it situates us. So often people share after they get hearing aids or something else, oh, I can hear the birds. Things that we don't even appreciate tell us where we are in terms of our environment. It's important in terms of cognition because the issue of cognition, more stimulus, and we'll get into this a little bit more, is very important in terms of being able to stimulate our brains. And more also, we're looking at the safe healthcare communication and what happens when you aren't able necessarily to hear what your practitioner is saying or other persons in a particular setting. And we do know that untreated hearing loss really is related to a number of rather negative outcomes in terms of loneliness, impaired relationships, depression, altered function in terms of falls, the risk factors for falls, isolation, and as I mentioned, altered cognitive status. We need to, in order for me to sort of talk about, and I'm sorry, this little picture I think keeps overriding some of the slides. I hope you can see them clearly, but I need to go over a little bit about hearing and how we hear and what changes with age, because that's part of why things happen in terms of communication. Hearing is a very complex process, and amazingly, it happens in just a split second. We hear sounds go into the ear by air conduction. It vibrates the little tympanic membrane that moves these tiny little bones. They're the tiniest bones in our body, the little ossicles, and that's mechanical transmission. So these vibrate, and then they move into the little cochlea. They move the fluid inside the cochlea, and that's now fluid conduction. And inside the cochlea, you see up here on the corner pictures of the hair cells, these tiny, tiny little hair cells. We have 3 layers of outer hair cells and 1 layer of inner hair cells. And these move in response to the movement in the fluid. The outer hair cells tend to be a little bit more responsive in terms of amplification, whereas the inner hair cells are connected directly to the nerve that goes to the brain. And then those transmit, when that signal happens, sends information to the brain by electrical transmission. And the brain, though, is where we hear. The brain has to get these signals correctly, and then it makes sense of what we've heard. And amazingly, this happens in just a split second. I say something and you hear it. Amazingly, it goes through all these different processes, and you then understand. But the brain has to get correct signals in order to make sense of it. And those little hair cells, as we get older, often become less responsive to sound. And you'll see here that there's, in the beginning of the cochlea, the hair cells in the first part are more sensitive to high frequency sounds. And we'll go into that, like birds, sirens. As you go along the cochlea, the hair cells become more responsive to low frequency sounds. You can think about drums, very low kinds of things. The important piece is that when you look at this as a schematic of an audiogram, you might see, and you see down here, the 125 to up to 1,000 are lower frequency sounds, and the vowels tend to fall here. Whereas the higher frequency sounds, or the higher pitch sounds, tend to fall, the consonants tend to be more high pitched. Then, so if you see that, this is called the speech banana. You see the sh, ch, th, k. All of those consonants are more in the high frequency, whereas the vowels like v, u, so forth are in the lower frequencies. Why does that matter to hearing? Well, if you lose those high frequency sounds, those consonants give words meaning. So that you can miss the consonants, you won't make out clearly what the word is. And what we see as we get older, the more common kind of hearing loss is that you may lose some of the amplification in the lower frequencies, so you need a little more loudness in those areas, but you really lose a lot more in the high frequencies, because the hair cells that are sensitive to those high frequencies are the most traumatized, or the most changed, or the most damaged, even by noise or normal aging, or many times medications. So we miss those high frequencies. So we can't make sense of the word. We hear it because we hear the vowels. So, but we don't understand it because we don't get the consonants. So the brain is not getting the information it needs. When you think about age-related hearing loss, it's so important to realize it's not like wearing earplugs. Age-related hearing loss is really a distortion or a muffling of sound. It's not just a decrease in sound. So you think about a word, and here, if you try to read that quickly, you're missing parts of it, and your brain is trying to understand what it just heard. And I keep losing my little, so nice weather, isn't it? Well, if you don't get all of that clearly, your brain is going to keep struggling to try and make sense of what was heard. And it's very common for people to say, I can hear you, but I can't understand you. You're not enunciating, you're mumbling. And it's especially bad with people who have accents because, of course, we're not used to hearing the accents. Rhyming or similar words are often very difficult to distinguish. Time, dime, pool, cool. These words that come into the sentences and so forth that we mistake and confuse with other words. Masks, which are so common, of course, now when we have to wear them, further muffle the sounds and especially filter out more of those high frequency that are so important to understanding. And the loudness from 3 to 13 decibels of potential loss by wearing a mask. There are clear masks. They're not easily available in some places. I did see that you can make your own, but unfortunately they can't be used in many healthcare settings if the person has an airborne respiratory problem or something like the COVID virus, partly because they're not sealed adequately yet. They may come out with new models, but at this point, they're not sealed adequately for that. But they can be used in other situations, and they do make communication a little easier. But communication, we have to realize, is also a two-way street. People have to talk. You have the speaker, the listener who has to interpret what was said, then speak back, and be interpreted by the other person. So many things in terms of fatigue, distractions, noise, emotions, all can influence communication. And if what the person, either the listener is hearing isn't clear on top of this, it really makes communication very difficult. So people who have hearing loss often become very frustrated because they can't hear. And people have said to me, I just can't, I'm not going to stay here because I can't understand what's being said. So they feel left out, a sense of loss, fear about potential loss in terms of jobs or other kinds of relationships. Unfortunately, people often still feel stigmatized, which I feel is unfortunate because this is like any other health condition. It's a change that we can do something about. But people many times feel stigmatized because they relate it to either aging or other kinds of problems rather than just hearing. And of course, fatigue and the effortfulness of listening. It's very effortful to try and keep listening and making sense of things when your brain isn't getting the signals very clear. But people, the communication partner, we have to realize that it's also affecting the whole family because they often may feel ignored when you talk to someone, they don't respond and you don't realize it's just that they don't hear you. Having to repeat information that's misunderstood. I told you that last week. Well, maybe the person didn't really hear it or didn't hear it clearly, or it was too much effort to hear, and so they forgot. Believing or assuming that more is heard and understood than actually is, loss of a valued relationship, effortful to remember and use effective communication strategies. It's extremely easy for us. We have best intentions, but just commonly we walk out of a room and start talking, and that doesn't help hearing. And then a tendency to minimize talking. So we thought it's too much effort. Maybe let's just be quiet. I won't share that. In the healthcare system, which is an area that I'm becoming more and more interested in too, is that there's misunderstanding of instructions, not able to have time to share your desires because it takes more time to communicate. Practitioners may not have time to do a thorough assessment or not hearing your name called when you're in the reception area or getting lab tests or anything else. So we'll talk more about things that you should do if you're in that setting. So what strategies can be used to communicate effectively, both with partners, spouses, family, at work, or in the healthcare system? There are things we can do to help communication. There are things that can help, and that's assistive. Usually we think of assisted listening devices, and that covers a range of possible interventions or things that we can use ourselves. The first thing, of course, that comes to mind is hearing aids. And hearing aids, of course, are an important option if you have significant hearing loss or even fairly mild to moderate hearing loss. They can be helpful. They come in all kinds of sizes. And unfortunately, many people want the little one over in the side here, completely in the ear. which is tiny, and the batteries that go in them are even tinier. So if you have any kind of arthritis or disability, they don't work very well because you only have that little tiny string coming out of your ear that you have to deal with. But it also isn't powerful enough to deal with much of the hearing that we often have. You have to have a larger one if you need more amplification, at least at this point, although they're getting smaller and smaller. So the ones like the over the ear or the various kinds of things, especially with the hearing aid in the back of your ear, those are much more powerful and you can have more programs in them if you need them for your hearing. The point that I think is so important is don't buy based on size. Buy based on, or if you get hearing aids, make sure you get one that works for your hearing, that is fitted to your particular kind of hearing loss, and that allows you to hear in the best way you possibly can. And you do need to think about the batteries that go along with it, because right now there are a few rechargeable, but you're not probably saving a lot of money because you have to replace the rechargeable about once a year. What hearing aids can do is they make speech easier to hear. They do not restore normal hearing, and it's so important to also remember that. They filter the sound to fit the hearing loss, so that you may get more boost or more amplification, more loudness in those higher frequency areas where you need it, and less in the lower frequencies where maybe you don't. And the audiologist is designed, they specifically have assessments where they can look at where your hearing loss is and where you need this amplification, especially if your hearing loss is fairly significant. Hearing aids, and everyone brings up the fact that they cost a lot and that the Medicare, unfortunately, does not cover hearing aids. But you're usually not paying for the hearing aid. Many times up till now, we're changing this a little bit, but audiologists often bundle their services. So when you buy a hearing aid, you're really paying for the service that comes with it. So you need to ask, what does the payment cover? What is included in the package along with your hearing aid? We're trying to unbundle the service so that there's more transparency about what you're paying for. There are several large wholesale corporations that have audiological services that offer less expensive hearing aids. And you don't necessarily need the most expensive. You always have to think about your hearing loss, where you need to hear most, where it's important for you to hear and where you want to hear most, and think about how do you best fit that hearing need. And many times the older models can be really fine because as they get newer and newer ones replace the older ones are still really very good, very functional, but they cost less. So think carefully. Also, we'll say this again later, is you should really shop around, because many times you'll find a similar hearing aid costing very different amounts of money depending on where you go. So you always have to ask questions and shop around. There is some legislation now that for over-the-counter hearing aids, but it's for mild to moderate hearing loss. They'll probably self-fitting. So you'd have to be able to manage the self-fitting things. And as I say, it's only for mild to moderate. So many of us, if we have fairly significant hearing loss, they won't work really well. They're not designed for that. You can also understand that there are, and I think most cell phones are now, but they have to be hearing aid compatible. And so think about when you're buying a cell phone, is it hearing aid compatible with your hearing aid if you buy one? And there are certain scales on what they call the microphone mode or the T-coil mode, but you want to have higher ratings and at least an M3 or a T3. But the regulations allow you to try out the cell phone with your hearing aid before you buy it. So you have rights around this. They're all alternatives to hearing aids, and they're what we call personal sound amplifying products. And there are some that have been tested to be pretty close to what a hearing aid would do in terms of speech understanding. although this is in artificial situations. So your situation may be different. I don't want to advertise any of these, but these are some of the ones that have been sort of tested. The Bose earphones, they now are coming over with a over-the-counter product of a hearing aid that's self-fitting. But the other ones are ones that have been tested and have been found to be relatively fairly good at speech understanding. Personal sound amplifiers, you have to be very careful if you buy something over the counter that its output, the amplification, the loudness, it doesn't get too loud because that can damage your hearing more. So it's good to have ones that are have been tested or looked at more closely. So you have to be very careful about what you buy. But personal sound amplifiers are often good, but they're not advertised for hearing loss. And as they say, you have to watch for sound output. That's possibly the difference, is hearing aids go through a very significant assessment process and meet specific standards before they can be sold. There are also a lot of other assistive listening devices. Ones that are important for persons personally often are things like special alarm systems in their homes, smoke alarms or others that come with much more low frequency that you can hear, or that flash lights or do other kinds of things to make you alert, things that wake you up by vibration. So there are a number of things that you can get. You just have to sort of look around. We can maybe talk more about that on Sunday if people are interested. Listening systems, I think those are in some of your settings already, various things that they use in terms of being able to amplify in large situations. But if you just need a hearing loss or something for TV, there are specific programs specifically for TV listening systems. There's also what they call a sound bar that people can sometimes use that give you much better reception for the TV if that's an issue, or if it's other people don't want the loudness, then you can use these TV listening systems. They're also amplifying phones. But the thing that I really like a lot is that personal amplifier, what we often call a pocket talker. We use those in clinical settings. It's a simple device that just has an amplification piece, and you can put in earbuds or something over your ears. You can get them in all ranges of prices. You don't want too inexpensive ones, or you want to make sure what the volume is so you don't turn the volume up too loud. But they can be like $150 to $200 or a little more, but certainly a lot less than a hearing aid, depending on where you wish to use them. And you can take them with you to a healthcare setting so that you can hear what the person is saying. If you have hearing loss, you can also be eligible for captioned phones, and that's a service that's free because we pay for it with our telephone bills. But what that does is if you call someone and you need the captioning service, the captioner will translate what the person says, and you can hear them and read what it is on the phone, or I think now you can get it so that you can read it on a computer as well. And then new things that are coming out are there are a number of apps that you can download on your cell phone that translate, that do voice to text, so that when someone talks and you hear it through the cell phone basically translates it and you read it on your cell phone. Now, obviously, you have to have enough so that you can read it. If you have any vision issues, could be a problem unless you have a larger iPad or something else that you can download it on. But these are getting much, much better in terms of accuracy. They're not perfect, but they're much better. We can, again, talk more about those. But this can be really, really useful. I have colleagues who do it on Zoom, and they hold it up to the computer, and they basically read what's being said on their computer, on their cell phones. The other thing I would just want to mention, and this can sound kind of complex, you can get a sample of this if you search for it online and hear this being used in the New York subway, but T-coils and induction loops. An induction loop is basically a little wire that goes around a room or a chair or a check-in counter or taxi cabs in the case of New York and over in Europe, they use these a great deal. But the induction loop basically from a little mic that can be in all sorts of ways. I have a portable loop that you can carry around. And then if you have a hearing aid or a neck loop or even a pocket talker that has a T-coil in it, then you just turn it to T-coil and the sound goes right to your ears, and is extremely helpful for a lot of people. Really like these. These are used quite a bit in houses of worship because they often are big buildings with high ceilings and are difficult to hear with a lot of people. So they can be very useful. People have looped rooms in their homes. You need a good looper, but that's good. But whenever you see that little T next to the ear, you know that that place has an induction loop and you can use your T-coil. Audiologists don't always turn on the T-coil. So you should ask about whether your hearing aid, if you have one or if you're going to buy one, has a T-coil. And again, you can't put those in the teeny little ones right now. And so you might want to just think about whether you have one. But the underpinnings, if we get back to communication itself, is awareness of the impact of hearing loss. If someone has a partner who may not have hearing loss and they can't quite understand it, there are simulations on the internet that can help. But it is important for anybody to realize, again, that hearing aid or hearing loss is a decrease, not just a decrease in sound, but a distortion, that you're losing key frequencies. And appreciate that hearing aids do not solve the problem. They do not correct the underlying problem. They amplify key frequencies, so hearing is less effortful, but you still may miss things. So you have to be very careful and still use effective communication strategies. You have to acknowledge that various surrounding factors that influence one's ability to hear in terms of fatigue, distraction, all of the things that we experience on a daily basis, and emphasize the desire to communicate. You really do want to hear and understand what people are saying. Unfortunately, a lot of times hearing loss comes on very slowly as we get older, and many times we're just not aware of how much we're missing because we're getting used to it. It's like any change that happens slowly. We kind of adapt to it. But you have to realize sometimes when you put on a pocket talker or something, you suddenly realize, oh my goodness, I didn't know how much I was missing. And people have shared that with me a number of times. What can we do to help here? Well, we can face the person with hearing loss and make sure the lighting is adequate. Don't cover your mouth. That certainly doesn't help at all. And of course, now we have masks covering our mouths. Speak at a normal rate. Don't shout because you're just making the noise or the sound that they're receiving that's already muffled just louder. It's not really clarifying it. Lower your pitch slightly could help. If you're asked to repeat, rephrase with different words. Again, because you're losing certain frequencies and certain words may be more difficult to hear. By replacing the word with another one, you may get a better understanding. Avoid critical conversations when you're tired. I know that's hard to do, but if you can, think about putting off things that are really important until you're a bit more rested, and write down information when it's important. For those of us who have, say, hearing better, it's sort of the reverse in terms of what we can do, but you have to stand so the person who is speaking to you has the light on their face. You don't want that person standing in front of a window or in a shadow, because the light will come from behind and can wash out the face, so you can't see their expression, you can't see their lips. Ask for a quiet area or have fans and other noisy devices turned off. That's certainly true in healthcare systems too. Many times you're in a single room and that's good, but let people know you have difficulty hearing. You have to self-advocate, not be afraid to say, I do have difficulty hearing. I need to face you. Make friends, healthcare providers, receptionists in areas, everyone know that you have problems hearing, because that communication is so important. Read lips. I know, as I say, it's more difficult now with masks. Consider the context. Ask for people to tell you the topic. We're going to be talking about X today. That should be true of your healthcare provider as well. Let them know that you need to have them tell you if they shift, they're talking about the illness and what they should do versus the medication versus whatever. So you're clear And then your brain can help a little bit more in terms of making sense of what's being said. Try to be rested. Again, something that's very hard for us to do. And ask for things in writing. Actually, those of us who can hear pretty well should still do that in the healthcare system, because we're mostly stressed anyway, being in there and hearing about issues around our healthcare. So we need things written down like anybody else. But you should be sure that they write down things that are important, that you really need to know. And then use the assistive listening devices. Use the pocket talker in the healthcare setting if you need it. Use your hearing aids when you need to hear. If you get hearing aids, they should be comfortable, but again, they're not like glasses. We can't just put them on and suddenly hear. Our brains, especially if we've had hearing loss for a while, needs to relearn how to listen. Our brain is kind of like a muscle too. If it's not getting stimulated, those little cells decide, if you don't want to use me, I'll go do something else. Our muscles don't get as strong. So your brain has to hear over time, which is why I encourage people to maybe get hearing aids or use amplification devices earlier in the process of hearing loss, so that you keep stimulating those neurons that are responsive to sound. It does take time to adapt. Wearing them is important. You usually have to return to the audiologist. If they're not working well, go back. This payment should cover most of these things, and you need to make that clear. They sometimes don't turn them up to the maximum because they don't want you to get that amplification right away. So they have to be fine-tuned. Be sure to say if they're not working or they're not comfortable. They don't work well in situations with poor acoustics, and they work well mainly within a relatively short distance. So they're not the only thing that we need to communicate effectively. Make sure your questions are answered. The Hearing Loss Association actually has a purchasing a hearing aid checklist or whatever online that you can use. And then use other assistive devices. Check with the hearing aid has a telecoil, and know that you can get a captioning phone. Know your Americans for Disabilities Act, because you're entitled, if you have hearing loss, to adequate communication strategies. So they have to provide services that allow you to hear the best you can in anything, whether you go to a hotel or anything else. You have rights for adaptive capacities that they should have available for you. So that's what I'd like to share today. And I thank you for your attention. And I hope that I say questions. I know we can't get at questions today, but I'm hoping that I think we'll be talking on Sunday if you can join, and that would be nice, and I'll give you more information. So I thank you very much for your attention today.
Well, I certainly learned a lot, but I'm planning on learning more on Sunday at 11 o'clock. Go to oakmontsundaySymposium.com, click on the link, and Dr. Wallhagen will be there to answer your questions. I know I want to learn more about the pocket tuner. And so I'm glad you joined us today.
Thank you very much.